Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. For those of you out there who are trying to find ways to recover from your addiction, you realize that the 12-step program probably for some of you has worked well. But according to the HBO documentary Rehab, of the 2 million Americans who seek treatment for addictions to alcohol or drugs each year, approximately 93% of them relapse after leaving treatment. The question is, why do most of them relapse in the first 6 months? Some of them relapse the day they go home, but the question is why? Our guest today was an addict turned counselor. Understanding that the current message proclaimed at a 12-step meeting is that no one recovers from this disease, a great majority of alcoholics and drug addicts are like caterpillars, as it's described, that refuse to believe that they are filled with beauty and power. So they never immerse themselves in the cocoon that can set them free. Today we're going to find out how a person, perhaps like a listener out there yourself, are more powerful than your addiction, that you can recover and transform your cravings for things such as pills, alcohol, drugs, into a craving for honesty, integrity, humility, peace, and freedom, plus much more. Joining us on the program is our guest, who is an addiction counseling, neurolinguistic programming, and trauma therapy specialist who also has hypnosis and is also licensed as a heart math provider. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Jack Kelly, who's going to talk with us about the 12 recovery myths. Jack, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
You know, this is really an interesting subject because over the years I have actually approached this myself and saying, well, if 12-step is so successful, and myself I've actually attended these, meetings, if you will, and I was really confused at the point, if I'm here to try to, let's say, battle my alcoholism, if you will, then how come I see so many people at some of these meetings that I had attended chain smoking and guzzling coffee as though their life depended on it? And I thought, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. I think I'm going to go back to, drinking the beer, which didn't bother me that much. And I just sometimes would have to step out of the room. And even as a former smoker, not a heavy one, but more social, I was like, I got to get out of this room before it kills me. Now, tell us about how this all started for you.
Well, if you take a look at what's happened from the time that Alcoholics Anonymous started until today, it's a very different program. What we have is you have old AA and you have new AA. But to put it in perspective, if you have a child or a spouse or a relative and find out they have an addiction, they say, well, you have to go to treatment. So when they go to treatment, what's the message that they get when they go to treatment? And my experience in doing groups and asking people what that message is, I'll use an analogy to explain it. Let's say that you went in for an annual physical. Set an appointment with the doctor, and a week later you go in, and she looks at you and says, Daniel, you've got cancer. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, what can I do about it? And she says, you're powerless over this disease. You're never going to recover from it. It actually wants to kill you. Matter of fact, it's out there doing push-ups. There's no hope being offered. And that is the message that the great majority of people who go into treatment get. I just finished doing a group with people who've completed 30 days of inpatient treatment. And one of the first questions that I ask somebody when I meet with them for the first time, and with this individual, I didn't meet with him when he was in treatment. So I said, if somebody asked you what you were powerless over, what would you tell them? And he said, my addiction. And I said, if you were powerless over your addiction, I'd tell you to go home. I mean, why go to treatment if you're powerless over your addiction? Why join a 12-step program if you're powerless over your addiction? That's not what recovery is about. It's not what the 12-step program is about. So if you take a look at the original 12-step program, the Alcoholics Anonymous, they said, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. They never said they were powerless over their addiction to alcohol. Two different things.
Okay.
So when they said they admitted they were powerless over alcohol, they then set a goal, and the goal was they were willing to go to any lengths to achieve victory over alcohol. So how can you achieve victory over something you're powerless over? And did they achieve victory? As far as achieving victory, here's what they tell us. The problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. It's gone, and it stays gone so long as we stay in fit spiritual condition. So the way that when you make that distinction between the substance and the addiction to the substance, I become powerless over alcohol and drugs once I put it inside my body. It's like a fuse gets lit. Think of it this way. I've got a volcano inside me. It's quiet, it's dormant, and it's harmless until I put alcohol or drugs inside my body. Once I do that, the volcano erupts, the tsunami of cravings kicks in, and when that happens, my brain gets hijacked. There's no access to rational thought. I can lose a job, a career, a marriage, a relationship, custody of my kids, my driver's license, go to prison. When the cravings kick in, there is no access to any of that. I love you. I promise you, I'm never going to do it again. I said it many times, and I meant it every time I said it. Unfortunately, there is no access to that love when the cravings kick in because the cravings are more powerful than love. Mm-hmm. You can believe that you walk with Jesus and Moses and Buddha and all the great spiritual teachers, but when the cravings kick in, there is no access to that either. So a very simple way to understand what happens when we put alcohol or the chemicals in alcohol or drug inside our body is the same thing that happens when you put X-Lax inside your body. The chemicals take over. The chemicals then write the next chapter in the story of your life. Now, if I don't put alcohol or drugs inside my body, I don't become powerless. So the whole concept of powerlessness is a physical thing. It's not mental, it's not emotional, it's not spiritual. Those things come under the heading of lack of power. The reason that people come into treatment is that before coming into treatment, their lives are controlled by obsessive thoughts, compulsive feelings, and physical cravings. Now, if you lack power, that is a totally different ballgame than being powerless. And that is what recovery is about. It's about power. And that power has nothing to do with intellect, has nothing to do with willpower. It's the way that we're designed as human beings. So how does one access this power? And my experience working in the field for 15 years as well as 39 years in recovery is that it comes from three sources. It comes from our breath, our imagination, and our heart. It's the way we're designed as human beings. And a simple way to understand that is the basic theme that I work with is that you are your own best drug dealer. You produce wonderful natural drugs. But in order for those drugs to be produced, you need tools to do that, and one is our breath. So when you think about it, you go to the gym, you work out, you come out, you feel great. Why? Serotonin levels are up, dopamine levels are up, endorphin levels are up. How does that happen? Deep breaths. So part of the program that I set up, I call it the MIND program, motivate, inspire, nurture, and empower. So very simple device. You teach people how to breathe. And when they take in those deep breaths, what happens over a course of a session, using the power of their breath, imagination, and their heart, which I'll explain in a second, they create a mood-altering experience. So I have people that I work with, they'll fill out a form, how they feel at the beginning of the session. I'm angry, I'm depressed, I'm lonely, I'm sad, I got aches, I got pains. And the first time I meet with them, it's usually they're at a 7, 8, 9, 10. And 20 minutes later, almost 100% of the time, they're at a 0. Mm-hmm. Getting in touch with this incredible power that they have inside their own bodies, minds, and hearts. So that's one source of power, the breath. It's a very simple concept. Second is imagination. The words we use, the images we create, the beliefs that we have incredible power. It's been documented millions of times in the medical field with placebos. When a company comes out with a new drug, one group gets the placebo, the water pill. The other group gets the real drug. Nobody knows who has what, but there are always people that get the water pill that come back with the same benefits that the people who got the real drug. So obviously, it wasn't the pill that did it. It was their beliefs about what that wonderful new drug was going to do was so strong, it created physiological changes in their bodies. In the Bible, when Christ would heal people, and they would say, "Thank you for healing me," he always said the same thing. It wasn't me. It was you. It was your belief that did it. Mm-hmm. So where that comes under the realm of spirituality, today it also comes under the realm of quantum physics. They came to the same conclusion. The power of the imagination is awesome. And the beautiful part about the mind program is that it's all experiential. The person actually experiences this power that they have access to within their own bodies, minds, and hearts. So a simple way to understand the power of our imagination, just close your eyes for a minute and imagine me sitting next to you with a plate filled with slices of lemons. And the listeners can do this too. Now imagine reaching out, picking up a slice of lemon. Imagine putting it in your mouth. And now imagine biting down on it. Did your mouth secrete saliva?
Well, absolutely.
So you just told yourself something that's not true. You don't have a piece of lemon in your mouth, but your whole body responded as if it was true. So here's what that tells us. Our brain doesn't know the difference between what we see and what we imagine. And that can be used in a very powerful way using simply visual imagery and the power of visual imagery. I work with a company called HeartMath. HeartMath has 20 years of hard scientific research behind them. What they've discovered is that over a 25-year period of research is that the heart is actually more intelligent than the brain. Tremendous communication between the two, but one of the things the heart does is produce wonderful natural drugs. The most wonderful natural drug it produces is DHEA. The only time that it produces that drug is when we have positive feelings. Love, peace, hope, gratitude. So, taking the mind program, combining the power of breath, power of imagination, the power of the heart, within a 20-minute period, a person has this dramatic change on a feeling level. And if you take the reason why most people will pick up a drink or a drug, because of emotions. I'm bored, I'm angry, I'm lonely, I'm depressed, I want to change the way I feel, and alcohol and drugs give one the ability to create that mood-altering experience. In learning how to use these tools, they learn how to create their own mood-altering experience. They become their own best drug dealer. So when you take a look at the 12-step program, the two basic messages that Alcoholics Anonymous had when they started out was, number one, that they were willing to go to any lengths to achieve victory over alcohol, and number two, that they were willing to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience, to connect with that part of ourselves, that higher self, that is much more powerful than our addiction, the part of us that is honest and compassionate and loving and forgiving. And the way that you do that, as it's outlined in the program, is through step 11, which is prayer and meditation. And if somebody has a problem with God, you can meditate without having any religious beliefs. And the original members of AA meditated every day. So part of the problem is the myths that have taken over the room. So when you take what Alcoholics Anonymous started out as, where we admit we're powerless over alcohol, and they understood exactly what that meant, and it's explained clearly in the book Alcoholics Anonymous in the chapter The Doctor's Opinion. And what he says in there is, in essence, think of it this way, Dan, you have an allergy. So long as you don't put alcohol inside your body, you're going to function like everybody else on the planet. However, once you put alcohol inside your body, you're not going to function like everybody else on the planet. So the whole concept of powerlessness is a physical thing. It is not mental, it is not emotional, it's not spiritual. And as I said earlier, that comes under the heading lack of power. Mm-hmm. And that's very clearly defined also in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, where they said it's lack of power that's the problem. When you think of the human resources we have available to us to solve our problems, our ability to reason, this is creating problems for me, I need to stop doing that. Every alcoholic and addict comes to the realization of that. But the ability to reason doesn't stop us from taking a pill, drink, or a drug. Second reason, the most powerful emotion people say is love, and it's not. Cravings are more powerful than love. So we need to find something more powerful than love. We need to find something more powerful than our ability to reason, and where the original members of AA found that was right inside them, and accessing that through meditation. So when people go to meetings, they're told the steps should be taken in order. And if that was literally true, then somebody should not do step 10, a daily inventory. Somebody should not do step 11, pray or meditate. Somebody should not help another alcoholic or addict until they complete the first 9 steps. And that makes no sense whatsoever. The first 9 steps should be taken in order. 10, 11, and 12 are maintenance steps. So when people come in and they're new and they're told the steps should be taken in order, by the time they get to meditation, they've gone through 7 or 8 treatment centers or they're dead. So all these myths that are starting to fill the room, like you're powerless over your addiction, you have to get out of the driver's seat. I got out of the driver's seat the day I became addicted to alcohol and drugs. So when you get into recovery, it's time to get in the driver's seat, not out of the driver's seat. You have to take responsibility for your life. You have to take responsibility for your recovery and ask for help. And there's all kinds of help available.
You know,
at this point, I'll let you get some input from you.
It's really fascinating to talk about this subject because over the years as we've been broadcasting this program, I've actually approached that myself. And, you know, I had to go to drug and alcohol counseling because of driving under the influence, which this day and age is becoming easier and easier to find yourself, you know, in a situation like that. And, you know, and I started stepping back, especially this day and age, realizing, you know, that's not the right thing to do, to drink and then get behind a motor vehicle. But the fact is there's a lot of money for that industry to be made, you know. And
right.
I don't know if they're so concerned about recovery as they proclaim, as, you know, the cash register rings. Boy, you're behind the wheel. It's measurable, and so therefore you get arrested by it. But that doesn't mean that the law itself isn't any less valuable. I believe that you should be careful. As you said, I was a bartender at one time, and it was funny because as I was doing that, I found myself drinking less. Interestingly enough, I think serving other people and looking at what they were doing,
right.
You know, I realized that what you're saying is true. It's once they put whatever the substance is into their body, some people can sit there and they can drink 4, 5, 10 beers, you know, get up, scratch their head, walk home the next day, and they go on to their successful job or whatever, and perform as though none of that ever happened. There are others that it almost seems like they could smell the alcohol. They're on their lips, and they're talking so irrational, you're thinking, what the heck is going on here? So it really varies. And I think what makes that interesting is the fact that, you know, in something like a recovery program, they sort of blanket this whole thing as, well, all of you, you know, are affected one way or the other. And it's really interesting because as I was sitting here in this group, I could see, you know, sort of the looks on people as the counselor was talking about these things, about 12-step, about this powerlessness, and you can sense that they almost felt like we have now just been separated from the group. You know, in other words, the group of regular people. Right. So if I go to a party and I don't drink, something inside me says, I am not good enough to do this anymore, to be part of this group, to be enjoying myself the way everyone else is because of the way that I act or react to whatever it is, you know, the alcohol, whatever it is. And it was funny because I think to myself, how does somebody overcome that so that they feel they're part of the group without using and feeling okay about that?
I'll give you a simple explanation based on my own experience. Mm-hmm. I can remember the first couple of months after I got into AA, I had some kind of I don't remember the function. It was a baptism, a graduation, and I went to a meeting the next day. And I don't remember what I said during the meeting, but I remember after the meeting, this woman came up to me and said, would you like to know what was bothering you yesterday? And I said, sure. She said, you resented the fact that you couldn't drink. That's what was going on with you. And I thought to myself, you know what? She's absolutely right. So when I first came into recovery, I said to myself, I cannot drink. Now, the point that I'm at today, I can not drink. I'm free. Mm-hmm. If I want to drink, I can drink. I know what the consequences are. I have an allergy. It's like X-Lax. Once I'm supposed to mix the chemicals in X-Lax, the chemicals in alcohol, the chemicals in drugs, the chemicals in my body, the chemicals then write the next chapter in the story of my life. But I think a better explanation is in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, where they're talking about addiction. And the woman says, how come we have so many alcoholics and addicts? And she said, I believe the answer is this. They haven't found anything better.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to find something better. You have to find a reason for getting up out of bed in the morning besides not simply picking up a drink or a drug. And if you take a look at it, I watched the movie The Secret with the group last week, and you get the message coming across in The Secret is that we become what we think about. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, the message that people are getting when they go into the rooms, unfortunately, so many of the rooms, is what I said earlier. You're never going to recover. Your disease is out there doing push-ups. It wants to kill you. And no wonder we have such a high relapse rate. There's no hope being offered to people.
Right. You're just stamped with the stigma that, you're an alcoholic or an addict for the rest of your life. And I found that, to me, intriguing, I thought. And at the time, I thought, as I was scratching my head, because I wasn't a heavy drinker then any more than I was since then. Even, again, as I worked in the industry, I could look across the counter and realize that what you're saying here is true, that when you use, you become powerless. And a lot of people actually do. It was really amazing to see, the transformation sometimes. Like, you just had one beer or one shot or whatever that thing was, and you literally transformed. There are people that just shouldn't even be using it all. And putting that aside and then pursuing those natural highs as you're talking about, I think if people had those wins in their lives, they would realize, I really don't want to use, because really physiologically speaking, you never feel good the next day. that hangover, whatever the case is, versus you did your first downhill skiing slalom, for instance, for those who may love skiing, and you realize, wow, that felt good. Think of the hangover of something like that. And if you could have more of those feelings, you realize that's a never-ending high. Pretty fascinating stuff.
The very simple way that I understand addiction is that once I put alcohol or drug inside my body, it can be different with alcohol. It's possible that I could leave here tonight, stop at a bar on the way home and have one drink and go home. It's also possible that I could be there at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know which way it would go.
Right.
But if I stop at the bar on the way home and I have one drink and go home, I've just convinced myself that I don't have a problem. Because if I really had a problem, I'd be there till 4 o'clock in the morning. So next night I stop and I have 2 drinks and maybe I go home. It's just a question of time before the explosion occurs. And I'm rushing to get to the liquor store before it closes. So it's no different as far as treating alcoholism as treating diabetes. There is a way to put this in complete and full remission. We do recover mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. There's only one thing that I cannot recover as an alcoholic and an addict, and that is the ability to safely use any mind-altering drug. Because once I put it inside my body, I can't stop. The cravings just take over, and my life is controlled then by obsessive thoughts, compulsive feelings, and physical cravings.
Mm-hmm. Now, how has it been as you've worked with people, as you've developed a different way of looking at 12-step, as far as recovery goes? What have you seen as far as transformation goes?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, okay, again, you've got the typical 12-step program that has more than a 90% relapse rate. You have developed a program that seems to be that, but it's much different. What has been the relapse rate then?
If somebody uses the tools, you're almost guaranteed not to relapse.
Okay.
And because it's like going to the gym and working out. So you join a gym, and at the end of 90 days, you're in great shape. And then you stop going to the gym.
There you go.
So you're going to go back being fat again. You have to maintain the program. So the key, what my book is about, is hardcore AA. It's just presented in a fresh perspective. AA works. It's like I've had people tell me, I don't believe in the 12 steps. Well, what are the 12 steps? The 12 steps are simply 12 spiritual principles. They're the same 12 spiritual principles you'll find in Catholicism, Protestantism, Lutheranism, Judaism, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and all the other isms. AA just package them in a way where we start to practice them in our daily lives. So the key to staying sober is to practice those maintenance steps, a daily inventory, prayer, meditation, and helping others. And if you take a look at Buddhism, Buddha summed this whole thing up this way. First of all, he identified the problem. He said all the suffering and unmanageability in his life came from what he called the three poisons: delusional thinking, destructive emotions, and cravings. The original members of AA described themselves, while they were active in their addiction, stating, "We were driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. The three poisons. Buddha had it right." So the way that Buddha summed up the 12 steps was this way. He said, if you want to be happy, joyous, and free, to use AA terminology, two things have to happen. Number one, you have to stop creating suffering in your life and the lives of the people you say you love. So how did he do that? He meditated every day. And then he said, after you do that, you have to spend the rest of your life doing something to help alleviate the suffering of other people on the planet. And that sums up what the 12 steps are. We stop creating suffering in our lives by accessing this part of ourselves, the higher self. And that has become so distorted in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, where somebody comes in and they got a problem with God, and somebody says, "That's okay, you can use a chair as your higher power." Give me a break.
That or the cup of coffee.
How about a doorknob? How about a key? Yep, whatever you want. You just make that your higher power. And that is so absurd, because if somebody has a problem with God, common sense would suggest use the group as a higher power, because the group has power, unity, strength, purpose, unconditional love. The day you walk in the door, use nature as a higher power. Go watch the sunrise, go watch the sunset, but not a chair or a doorknob. And if you look at the real insanity of that, they're inanimate objects, and the dictionary defines inanimate as dull, dead, lifeless, spiritless, something which lacks the power or force of living things. So no wonder we have such a high relapse rate when people are being told to use inanimate objects which are dull, dead, lifeless, spiritless, something which lacks the power or force of living things as a higher power. Absolute insanity. So insanity, step 2 says they're supposed to get restored to sanity, not put people put them into a deeper state of insanity.
Here's, I guess, an interesting way, because you brought up both movies, What the Bleep Do We Know, and of course The Secret, and I've had the privilege to interview many who have actually been involved in both of those films. And you talk about the power of the mind and the power of our thinking. Just last night I was catching on one of the religious channels as I'm flipping through to look for something to watch. I caught, there's a speaker that from time to time I catch on there by the name of Dr. Charles Stanley. And he's really a fascinating person to watch. People think religious channel, and I'm sure they think the evangelist. But this guy really, it's funny when he talks about concepts in the Bible, you can't stop listening to him, you know. And the fact is he talks a lot about that. Like the first time I came across one of his talks was he was talking about the I guess it's the power of disappointment and how to overcome disappointment. And he simply said this, and it was funny to really marinate in what he said after the fact, that I thought this is so true. He said, disappointment is inevitable. However, discouragement is a choice. And I see that, you know, for instance, an addict can find themselves in that loop. Like, you will become disappointed perhaps as you decide to step away from a pattern of behavior that no longer serves you nor the people you love around you, okay?
Right.
So as you're taking these steps out into this so-called new you, or this new way of being, there are times that disappointment just comes into your path where you might feel, well, I need to take the edge off, okay? And that's exactly what he talked about in this talk, as he says, pay attention to what your mind starts saying to you when that disappointment occurs. And when you can empower yourself to simply observe this, decide in those moments what direction would you really like to go. And that is how you overcome discouragement and that disappointment. In other words, just like what you're saying, you begin to empower yourself to realize you are more powerful than you believed you were at one time. And that's why I like what you're talking about here, especially in your book, Radical Recovery, is that we are not powerless. We just become powerless as a result of the substance that creates the alteration. That's pretty fascinating to look at.
You don't put it in your body, you don't become powerless. Now, there's another side of this, and the other side of this is that if you look up the word sober in the dictionary, it has two parts. A is not drunk or high. So if I just don't pick up a drink or a drug, I'm not drunk or high. There's a second part of the definition of the word sober is well-balanced, realistic, sensible, dignified, rational, not driven to extremes in emotional thought. And you don't get that by simply not picking up a drink or a drug. You get that by accessing that part of ourselves, the higher self, that is loving, forgiving, compassionate, honest, etc. And how do you do that? Meditation. It's a simple, powerful tool for us, not just as alcoholics and addicts, but as human beings. And even if you take heart math that I work with, heart math is based on simply, change the feeling. You're in a situation, and you change the channel. Okay, so you just, let me pause here. I'm taking a deep breath. I'm going to think about something and feel grateful for something. And then within seconds, this is emotional shift. So, what has happened within the rooms of recovery and in the treatment centers is, and this is promoted throughout not just the rooms, but in so many treatment centers, is you'll hear people say things like, my disease was speaking to me today. And my response to that is that if you have been diagnosed as being paranoid schizophrenic, you have a disease that speaks to you. We are not in the same boat as paranoid schizophrenics. So if you want to use the terminology, my disease was speaking to me, well, exactly what is it that, quote, is speaking to you? And when you get to the root of it, it's not disease, it's disease. I was bored, I was angry, I was lonely, I was depressed, and I wanted to change the way I felt. And how have you done that in the past? I drank or used drugs. Now all of a sudden, you're learning some new healthy coping skills. I can pause for a minute, I can take a deep breath, I can call somebody, I can go to a meeting, I can go for a walk, I can go scream in my car. I got 10 other options I never had before. And that's what recovery is about, is learning more than that one coping skill that we have at the moment that we come into recovery. So if you take a look at the unmanageability in our lives, I really thought when I first came into recovery that alcohol and drugs made my life unmanageable. So since I was no longer drinking or using drugs, now my life was going to be manageable. And it didn't take me long to figure out that I did not need alcohol or drugs to make my life unmanageable. But I was quite capable of doing that all on my own.
There you go. So disappointment really took over, didn't it? Boy, were you a discouraged soul. Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating way to look at it, because just a few nights ago I was listening to an interview with the author of the new book on, I'm trying to think of it now, Janis Joplin, and about her life. And it was fascinating to listen, because he was the road manager for Janis Joplin up till the day she had actually died, and was the one that actually found her. And he was saying, it's really, that was a death that was a tragedy, because she was really cleaning herself up and beginning to realize her potential range, and that she was really connecting with a specific music producer that was showing her the possibilities, because she was only in music, 3 or 4 years at best. And so here in the last year and a half of her life before she passed, that she was really beginning to gain that clarity and the possibility. In other words, that high from in us when we begin to express that authenticity of who we are, to use that gift that we were put here to use when we discover that. And for whatever reason, he was talking specifically that then they didn't know as much about recovery and how the mind works as they do today. And so she was caught in the illusion, well, if I take one drink, I'm okay, I can control this. But as you were mentioning earlier, the mind's got a tricky way of saying, now, that didn't feel so bad. What do you say we go ahead and do one or two more? You deserve it. And it's interesting to think about the pattern of thinking that leads you back to where you actually left off when you stopped. Unfortunately for her, it got overwhelming, and, well, the rest is, well, in the news. But, that you find yourself sometimes that your mind can actually trick you back into patterns of behavior that didn't serve you very well.
Now, this comes under the heading of delusional thinking,
right,
versus I have a disease that speaks to me. We're in the same boat as everybody else. So if you go back to Buddha, if you took just picture a triangle, and you got the 3 points on the triangle, and you have 3 circles of power at each one of those points. So one is the mind, which generates thoughts. And if you take a look at, if we just had a brain, we'd still be living in caves, but as a result of having a mind as a species, we've been able to put men on the moon, find cures for diseases. It's a huge circle of power for us as human beings. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. The mind has a dark side, and the dark side of our mind is our ability to rationalize. Lying, cheating, stealing, murdering, raping, there's absolutely nothing that we can't rationalize as human beings. So if you want to think of that circle of power, it's like a battery. It's got a positive charge and a negative charge. We can do some wonderful positive things, and we can also do some very destructive things. So if you move to the bottom right side of the triangle, we have emotions, which I use as a broad general category. And then it breaks down into specific feelings. So let's take anger as an example. If you want to give anger a color, what color would you give it, Daniel?
Most likely it would be red or orange.
Okay. Most people will pick red or black. The color is really not that important. What is important is that there are people who are serving life sentences in prison because they're angry one day and they killed somebody. Would you agree with me, when that anger took over, at that moment, there was no access to rational thought, such as, if I killed this person, I could spend the rest of my life in prison. This is not a good idea. Agree?
Agreed.
There are people on the planet this minute that are not going to be here tonight. Today, they're going to blow their brains out. They're going to take a drug overdose. They're going to crash their car into a wall. They're going to jump out of a window. They just can't take the pain anymore, and they want out. But we also have some very positive emotions. We have love and compassion and empathy and forgiveness. Would you agree with me that those emotions and feelings are a huge circle of power for us as human beings?
Very much.
Okay. Let's go up to the top of the triangle and draw a circle there. We have spirit, which generates power, and it comes in 2 varieties. Everybody would agree that we have the human spirit, and for those who believe that there's something more than that, we have a divine spirit. So let's take a look at the human spirit. Have you ever seen the movie Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe?
What? That was about a boxer, wasn't it?
It was.
Okay, yeah, with, I believe it was Jennifer Connelly. Okay, yes, I do remember that movie.
Yeah. He had 3 fights to go to have a shot at the heavyweight title, and then the stock market crashed, and he lost all his money. Now he's got a wife, he's got 2 kids, and no money. There's a fight coming up, and he's going to postpone the fight because he's got a broken hand. But now he needs the money. So he goes into the fight with the broken hand, does so poorly, the boxing commission shows up in his dressing room and wants to know if he threw the fight. And he said, I didn't, my hand's broken. And they said, you had the nerve to go into the ring with a broken hand. Your career is over. You're done. Don't ever come back. So this is 1929. Very few jobs. So he goes down to the docks in Philadelphia, starts to work there, can't use his left hand. He's a lefty, and his left hand is broken, so he starts to use the right hand. Right hand gets very strong and powerful. The left hand eventually heals. And then one night, a fighter can't make it to a fight, and they ask him if he'll come. Nope, no time to prepare. $200, you bet. Nobody expects him to win, and he wins. The crowd loves him. The promoters love money, so they schedule another fight, and they say he'll never win that. And he goes on to win every single fight, and he becomes heavyweight champion of the world. So when he became heavyweight champion of the world, a reporter interviewed him and said, we thought you were a loser, you were washed up, you're going nowhere. What motivated you to accomplish what you've accomplished? And he said, milk. And there was a flashback to him sitting around the kitchen table with his kids during the Depression, and there wasn't any milk, and there wasn't any cereal, and there wasn't any heat in the apartment, and there wasn't any money in his pocket. So he gets that image and comes up with power and strength. that gives him access to all what he needed to do was to overcome that obstacle that was standing in front of him. And that's the human spirit, and we all have access to that. Agree?
Agreed.
Okay. Now, there's another circle of power. I call it the passenger inside the vehicle, and that's cravings. We have more than 250 12-step programs. We all have the same primary addiction, and that is want to escape from mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual pain, and the alcohol and the drugs give us the ability to create that mood-altering experience. So cravings are an extremely powerful force. Agree?
Definitely.
Okay, so let's go back 2,500 years. Buddha's walking down the street. You go up to the Buddha and you say, I want to know if you know why we're here on the planet. And Buddha says, well, Daniel, before you leave the planet, it might be very nice if you would experience inner peace. Would you like to do that?
Sure.
Okay. He says you got three major obstacles to getting there. So picture the triangle. First circle, the mind. Delusional thinking, which usually manifests itself in our lives as human beings in the form of, if I just had more. More money, more drugs, more alcohol, more sex, more control, more power. I'd be so happy. Well, tell that to Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Winehouse, Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, and a lot of other dead people. For us human beings, there's never enough of more. Destructive emotions. If we let shame, guilt, anger, resentment, self-pity, self-hatred control our lives, we are not going to be happy campers. And if we let cravings control our lives, we're not going to be happy campers. So Buddha says, let me tell you how to solve this problem, Daniel. Think of these circles of power as muscles. You have a mental muscle, an emotional muscle, a craving muscle, and a spiritual muscle. The mental, emotional, and craving muscle are designed to serve you, not to control and dominate you. And I would say to serve you on a more consistent basis, meaning I'm a human being. I got lust to deal with, I got anger to deal with, I got greed to deal with, I got all these powerful forces to deal with. But he says, if you will take the time to develop that spiritual muscle, here's what's going to happen. First of all, the most immediate effect is it's going to relax your body. Meditation. It's going to quiet your mind. It's going to calm your emotions. And when you do this, when you access this power on a consistent basis, it gives you access to that part of yourself that's able to transform that craving for pills, alcohol, or drugs into a craving for honesty, integrity, peace, and freedom. And that is what recovery is about. It's about power. Nothing to do with willpower, nothing to do with intellect. It has everything to do with the way we're designed as human beings. So it goes back to what you had read at the beginning of this segment, where I walk into a room and I fly into a room, a caterpillar, and a bunch of caterpillars in there, and I say, I found out we're not caterpillars, we're butterflies. And they start throwing rocks at me. Get out of here. You're crazy. You're a wacko. No, it's true. No, get out of here. I have no power. I have no beauty. Get out of here. And that's the mental state that people come in when they come into recovery. I'm a loser. I'm no good. And it's been reinforced past many times before they ever picked up a drink or a drug. And so what recovery is about is changing that whole perspective. And it's not a belief system. It's a knowing system. You feel it, you know it, you think differently, you act differently, you behave differently. And that is what recovery is about. It's that second part of the definition of the word sober. The well-balanced, the realistic, the sensible, the dignified. And that's what the mind program that I created is all about. Learning how to access that power and then to continue to use it, because people come into treatment and they go back to the same environments, and it's, don't drink, go to meetings, get a sponsor. Okay. What tools and resources am I taking with me? Don't drink, go to meetings, get a sponsor. It's not going to cut it, as we know from this huge relapse rate that we have within the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when they leave, they're armed and loaded when they leave, when I work with them. They've got very powerful tools, and they've experienced them and the change and the power that it represents for them.
Now, I think
That's
what
why I
makes
wrote the
this,
book.
what I was going to point out is you bring up a very interesting thing for people to consider, and that is, for instance, whenever you go to, let's say, a seminar, a weekend workshop, when it comes to setting goals and achieving your dreams and desires, one of the things they talk about is the fact that a lot of times as you decide to make this new change, okay, that you still are surrounded with the people that in the beginning of this change process that you're looking for that may wish you well. However, they could also be the ones that dampen or hinder you from making that progress in the direction that you want to, this new direction that you want to go. And I don't see how recovery would be any different. Now, I remember my first experience again having to go to one of these meetings. I sat there, and of course what was interesting is I didn't know any better, so there I was sitting in front of the class, so to speak. And apparently, as one of the guys decided to speak up, he says, well, I admire your courage. Most of the time people creep in through the back door, and they sit in the back. He says, here you are sitting in the very front. And I said, well, I didn't know any better, I guess. But anyway, what I found interesting, besides the heavy chain smoking and the constant guzzling of coffee, I don't know how many pots of coffee must have been drained that night in the hour or 2 hours that I was there, but the other thing that I found interesting is one person kept trying to outdo the other with how far down the hole they went. And I thought, well, what is this supposed to be also? A comparison of how bad life can get and how much better it is now, you know? And they kept reliving and buying and believing their story, and I thought, but that's what you did, but this is where you are now. Why don't you guys focus on where you are now and where you would like to be, I thought. And I just scratched my head realizing I don't know that this is going to work too well for me, but that's one aspect of what I'm talking about. The next one is that you decide that you want to make this change, but yet you're still surrounded by the group of people when you were the way you were to begin with. An example, for instance, you might be someone whose family loves to, let's say, party. You know, you get together for Thanksgiving and there's the wine and all that going on, and you're sitting there and you realize, well, I can't have that, you know, and everybody, meaning well, says, well, we'll make sure that we offer you a Coke instead while we all enjoy ourselves. You know, there's that subtle feeling inside of you that says, geez, I can't measure up to this and I don't deserve, and therefore, you know, they're controlling their thing and I can't, and they're trying to wish you well, but the truth is you get this feeling they're looking at you as being weak. You know, there's that feeling. And in goal setting, or as I was talking about, you know, these weekend retreats, they suggest, well, maybe with this change, when you want to move in this new direction, it's suggested that perhaps you build new relationships that support the direction you want to go. What do you think about something like that?
I can't tell you how many people I've met that stop going to meetings because they come out worse than them when they go in, because this is exactly what goes on at the meetings. There's no talk about the solution. It's just people reliving the past and one outdoing the other on, you know, how much they drank, how much they used drugs, how much trouble they got into, and there's very little talk about recovery. So if you go back to those meetings that you talk about, where motivational meetings, the first thing you have to do is you have to believe that you can accomplish the goal. Sure. I think one of the greatest books that was ever written is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And, you know, he spent 25 years researching, you know, very successful men. He wrote the book, was published, I think, in 1939. Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, and he identified 13 qualities that they had in common. And the first one that he identified was they believed. They didn't believe I can do it. It's like it's done. I am there. The belief, the passion. They had to have that passion. So you walk into a room and you're told that you're never going to recover. Well, that's no wonder, again, why we have such a high relapse rate. There's no hope being offered that you can recover, that you're much more powerful than the addiction. And that's not the message, unfortunately, that people are getting in the rooms. And that's why I've met people where they don't go to meetings anymore. They just do whatever they do. And then eventually they wind up relapsing in many cases. But there has to be a change within the industry, and a change has taken place. There's an organization called ManyFacesOneVoice.org, and it's alcoholics and addicts who've come out of the closet and said, you know what, we have a disease. So this thing about the shame-based, I'm not ashamed of the fact that I have a disease. I have diabetes. I am not ashamed of that. I have the disease of chemical dependency. I'm not ashamed of that. What does that mean? It means I cannot safely put alcohol or drugs inside my body. And the same with diabetes. I cannot safely put some certain foods in my body because it could have a very negative impact on me. So it's important to accept the fact it really is a disease, and it will kill you if it's left untreated. But you've got to believe, that's the first premise, that you can recover.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the exact opposite of the message that people are getting at meetings. It's like this session that I did an hour ago. I asked this kid, somebody asked you what you're powerless over, my addiction. He spent 4 weeks in treatment. And that's the message that he comes out with, that he's powerless over his addiction. Sad.
Kind of makes you wonder, and I don't know if you did this or how you actually conduct your call them workshops, but did you ever ask someone, well, how do you feel about that? Just to see, what would they say when they come out with a message that says you are powerless? How do you feel about that? And explore what that is.
Yeah.
And I would think that if it puts somebody to feel so disempowered, that probably that existed before they began using.
Yes.
Would that be a fair way to look at it? Because addiction is emotional.
Correct. It's both mental, emotional, and spiritual. Now, what's interesting is when you take a look at what the original members of Alcoholics Anonymous discovered, they said, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So what's the spiritual malady? And if you look at the book, the spiritual malady are those destructive emotions. The anger, the resentments, the shame, the guilt, and that just absorbs our being. It's like absorbing sludge into your whole system. And it's like, I'm no good, I'm a nothing, I'll never be anything. And you're not offered a whole hell of a lot more than that. When you think about the potential that we have as human beings, whatever one human being can do, every human being has the potential to do at least. And that's not what's being offered. People aren't being asked to access that power. It's just don't drink, go to meetings, just don't pick up. And when somebody says that, I want to puke, because my question is, well, where are you going to get the power to do that? Because obviously you haven't been able to do that. And if you had the power to just not pick up, you wouldn't need a 12-step program. You wouldn't need recovery. You wouldn't need to go to treatment. So it's about finding that power. And we're not talking about religion. We're talking about the way that God designed us as human beings. The power, and if you take a look at any spiritual tradition, they all say the power is inside you. If that, Christ said it, kingdom of God's within you. On any spiritual path, including the 12 steps, it says you'll find the great reality inside you. That's the only place that you're going to find it, that part of yourself that is so much more powerful than your addiction. And I've been in recovery for 39 years. I know very few people in the program who meditate. And it's where that message, that the spiritual solution has been replaced with the meeting solution. Meeting makers make it. And you're never going to recover. And if you take a look at the introduction to the book Alcoholics Anonymous, it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state in mind and body. And the main purpose of the book is to show people exactly how we recovered. And that message is completely denied, for the most part, in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. You're never going to recover. So it contradicts what's actually in the literature itself and the experience of the original members of the AA, who again said, has been removed, it doesn't exist for us, it's gone. And it stays gone, so long as we stay in fit spiritual condition. And that's the key to the whole thing, the spirituality. So that has been replaced with meeting makers make it.
Now, there you go, spirituality. You kind of wonder, because it seems, and again, this is just an opinion and my observation, that when you look at the birth of the 12-step program, and it was interesting because there's actually movies called My Name is Bill W., starring, I believe it's James Woods and James Garner, and there is that scene where they come to the realization how they could possibly help each other. You mean it's just a couple of drunks sitting around, instead of drinking, just kind of talking things out? I thought, well, that's interesting. That isn't what it seems to be, at least, and you see the evolution of what happens. But when you bring in the spiritual aspect of it, let's say organized religion, a fair amount of 12-step programs were kind of grown in places like churches where you could actually use the space. And you kind of look at the evolution of the AA meeting as we're presenting here today as being powerless. So you need to keep coming back here. You see a lot of religious institutions doing the very same thing over the centuries, finding ways to disempower the individual to make them believe they can't break away from the flock. You need to keep coming here. You need to keep supporting this group, or you'll be ostracized or downright shunned. Is that sort of what happened here with the AA and the 12-step program, do you think? Again, just opinions.
Yeah. There are two parts to the program. One is getting sober and staying sober. And then at that point, it goes back to what Buddha said. Now, you need to spend the rest of your life doing something to help alleviate the suffering of other people on the planet. So I've been given the gift of sobriety. I worked for it. I did all the work that I needed to do to get that. So if you think of the 12 steps simply as 12 exercise machines, they're 12 spiritual principles, and you get somebody who will take you through these exercises. So you start working out with these spiritual principles. And then your job for the rest of your life is then to give that away, to help somebody else recover mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. So the reason, for 20 years, I went to an awful lot of meetings. I was a meeting maker. And what kept me motivated to do that was two things, fear and greed. I knew that if I picked up a drink or a drug, that mentally and emotionally would take me back to going to bed at night praying that I wouldn't wake up in the morning. And I wanted to make money. And I knew that if I drank or used drugs, that wasn't going to happen. So for 20 years, that was the motivating factor.
Wow.
And I had this incredible experience in 20 years where I looked up the word sober in the dictionary and saw that other half of it. If somebody had said to me, well, how do you feel at the end of 20 years about the people in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous? And I say, I love these people. But I got to the meeting right before it started, and I left as soon as the meeting was over. And I really, when I look back, I really didn't care about you. It was all about me not picking up a drink or a drug. So today, I go to meetings, but it's not out of fear. It's not out of greed. I go to support the other people to keep doing, and for them to support me, to keep doing the things that I need to do to stay free. So it's no different than going to the gym, and you get in good shape, and then all of a sudden you start to slack off, and you get somebody else, and now the two of you, and then three of you are going to, and now you're there supporting each other to keep doing the things that are going to make you and keep you healthy. And that's where the whole 12-step program comes in, that we get sober, and once we get sober, we help other people. We give back to other people. So that's why I continue going to meetings, to give back what was so freely given to me. It's not out of fear any longer. It's not out of greed. For 20 years, that's what it was. I was just a meeting maker.
And it's an interesting point, too, because when you are in your addictive pattern, it's a very selfish pattern. You're trying to find ways that you can go and use and enjoy yourself, and it doesn't matter what it costs. And you bring up a valuable point that, well, when you begin to switch that thinking to how can I serve others with who I am, you'll find that almost that addiction just falls away. It's just a very natural thing. Does that usually happen?
The obsession, the compulsion, the physical cravings get lifted. Mm-hmm. And the reason AA had a high recovery rate, number one, they meditated every day. Number two, they went to one meeting a week. The other 6 nights, they were out helping other alcoholics. So it says, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. And that's certainly not limited to alcoholics and addicts. It includes our spouses, our partners, our children, etc. My experience has been that almost every year I've said to myself, this has been my best year. And when I say my best year, I'm finding that I'm more patient, I'm more tolerant, I'm more loving, I'm more compassionate. And that is what the Whole Body program is about. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we carry this message to other alcoholics and drug addicts. But that we start to function at this higher level, that the higher self becomes more dominant than the lower self. So if you take a lower self, that's not a bad self. That's our mind, our emotions, and our cravings, but they need to be tamed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the higher self comes in. That's where I call it the spiritual muscle. And meditation and prayer are two things that will develop that spiritual muscle. And then helping other people. Key elements.
The book is Radical Recovery, 12 Recovery Myths, The Addiction Survivor's Guide to the 12 Steps. Our guest today, Jack Kelly. Is there a website people can find out more?
Yes, it's www.thelazarushouse.net.
Jack, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Did you have any parting thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
Don't give up hope and believe. You've got to believe that you can recover. For any goal, you have to believe that you can do it. It's a key component to being successful at anything. And for people who are involved with meetings, go to Big Book meetings, go to step meetings. Don't go to drunkalogs.
Yeah, they're no fun anyway, especially if you don't like coffee or cigarettes. Jack, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can be sure to find out more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. Also follow us on Twitter at Beyond50Radio as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.